experiencing because he's forced to help an enemy of his. So he has to help not a friend, not something, not something. Sorry, not someone belonging to his family or his friends, and so on and so forth. But he has to help his enemy, and he's frustrated by this situation, and he covers his face with his left hand. So this picture became really iconic and became viral, as we say, in the West, and it became the symbol of frustration for online communication. So when we are when we feel that we are frustrated, that we are not happy with something, that we are bored by something, that we are sad due to something, in online conversations, we use this picture to communicate these to communicate this feeling, this emotion. I just read the chat. Okay, I've just heard about the TV series in the Big Bang Theory. Okay, so it's also, it's partially famous also in China. So this is the meme that is employed in online communication just like an emoticon. So we feel something, we want to comment on something, and we use this picture. I just go on with the slides, but it's very slow, so I have to wait a little bit. Okay. So this internet meme, which is the face palm, became the symbol, the main way to express this kind of emotion, this kind of passion, this kind of state of the mind, so frustration. And it became so popular because, as I already said in general about internet memes, because of its capability of being a powerful sign, a powerful emotions. We can just draw a few lines. We can just draw the very silhouette, the very shape of someone doing this gesture, and we immediately understand what we are talking about. So just like most of internet memes representing the face and the emotions conveyed by the face, it became popular because it's stylized, because it's really synthetic. It's like a cartoon, it's like a comic. And we can say that this internet meme, so this picture, this photo that became viral just in the same way in which all the emoticons and emojis became viral and popular on the internet. So focusing on the capability of the face of translating not with words but with picture, so iconically, we say in semiotic terms, an entire story, an entire narrative. When we see a picture just like this, we immediately understand that something has happened and that this character, this figure is reacting to it in such a way. So, semioticians really love to start with definitions, and we have here a very basic definition of frustration. So frustration is the feeling of being upset or annoyed as a result of being unable to change or achieve something. So I'm frustrated when I want to take this cup in my hand and I cannot reach it. So I can see the cup is really next to me, but I cannot reach it, and I'm frustrated by that. So I can see my target, I can see what I want to get, but I cannot do that. And obviously, the pandemic and the quarantine we all experienced, and we are currently experiencing in most of the countries worldwide, created a situation, a context of generalized frustration, because we were used to go outside of our homes to interact with other people. It was really normal for us. It was what made us human beings, social human beings, and we couldn't do that for months. Now in Italy, we are slowly starting to coming back to a normal situation where we can interact with other people, we can go outside of our homes, but it was at least a period of 3 months of complete frustration for anybody here. So the pandemic and the quarantine brought frustration to us, created frustration to us, and we were not talking about, we were talking only about the virus and the pandemic and the quarantine in the past month, and we still are. So the main discourse, all the media, all the channels of communication were full of texts, pictures, videos talking about the virus and the pandemic and the quarantine. So, as it happens really often, this main topic of discussion, this subject, was everywhere, and it kind of rewrote, transformed, remixed anything that we have experienced in the past according to the new situation. So everything from politics to religion to the history of art was remixed by the discourse of the virus and the pandemic and the quarantine. Here in this slide, you can see fragment of a very famous painting in Rome, in Cappella Sistina, where you can see God lending his hand towards Adam. And obviously, this is just a simple example of how the virus and the pandemic recreated pieces of culture according to itself. So here you can see God cleaning the hand of Adam with sanitizing gel, for example. So the pandemic rewrote everything, and also internet memes were included in this process. So also internet memes were recreated according to the pandemic and the quarantine. So before the virus, we had the internet meme on the left where Captain Picard covers his face because he's frustrated and he uses his left hand. After the virus and the pandemic and the quarantine, since we were told not to touch our eyes, nose, or mouth with the hands in order to avoid contagion, even the internet meme of the facepalm was forced to not use hands in order to communicate the original message. So this is an internet memes that talk from the one hand of the virus, of the pandemic, and from the other end, this meme talks about how internet memes work themselves. So as we say in semiotic terms, it's a meta internet meme. It's a meme that talks about other internet memes. So I think that this is a really fun example, and it's really meaningful because it helps us understanding a series of things. So first, it may appear strange that also in a dramatic and a tragic situation like the pandemic and the quarantine, we still create silly pictures and silly videos that we call internet memes. So even though the situation is bad, is tragic, we still continue creating silly things and funny things, talking about the tragic event. We can say that these really silly and funny internet pictures and the internet memes are like a small model of our culture. It's like a miniature of our culture works. So in the picture that I showed you before, in this picture, we can see a kind of synthesis, a kind of synthetic vision of how culture was changed due to the virus and the pandemic. So they are silly and they are funny, but they are really meaningful. They are really interesting for a semiotician. And actually, we can see that the internet memes about the virus and the pandemic actually do not talk about the virus itself. They do not talk just about the virus, but they rather talk about our obsession for the virus and the pandemic. So they are like a parody, a satire of our obsession towards the virus and the pandemic. And another really interesting and really semiotic thing that we can say is that also from this very simple picture of the face covered by the hand, we can say that meaning is always systemic. In semiotics, we do not believe that things are meaningful by themselves, but rather that they are meaningful because they are just a single part of a much more complex system. So, for example, the hand has a really important contribution in communicating the feeling, the emotion of frustration in the picture that I showed you before. And at the same time, we can say that, I go back again, the second picture, the picture without the hand, would not be funny, would not be meaningful and understandable if we didn't know the original picture, the original internet meme. So things are meaningful because they are set in a context, in a network of relationships. Why we still create stupid or silly or funny pictures like internet memes talking about the coronavirus during the pandemic? Well, we can say that since we were closed in our homes, since we were experiencing the lockdown, we were left with really few semiotic resources to express ourselves because we couldn't and we cannot, in some cases, interact with other people face to face. And so there was a really huge production of texts, pictures, and videos online talking about the situation because it was the actually the only way in which we could and in which we can express talking about the virus and the pandemic. And perhaps the semiotic operation of creating funny and silly and stupid pictures talking about the virus is precisely aimed at normalizing this situation that we never experienced and that we could not understand. So it's a really dramatic and tragic situation. We have no cognitive and semiotic resources to understand it and to cope with it, and we exactly try to normalize it as we do every day with other subjects and topics, creating funny and silly and stupid pictures like this one in this internet meme, which became very popular in the West. You can see rap singer and producer, but also entrepreneur and politician, maybe Kanye West, laughing, still trying to laugh even though the situation gets worse and worse. So the smile on his face is progressively becoming less smiling. Is becoming a little bit sad as time goes by, but still he wants to laugh, and he tries to laugh even though the situation is bad. So why can be interesting and meaningful to study, for example, internet memes or emoticons and emojis and other pieces of digital media such as these, for a lot of reasons, but in particular because they help us understanding. They help us understand how meaning is always systemic, is always complex. Meaning is always dealing with different parts of our cultural system. For example, the simple picture of Captain Picard putting the hand on his face in shame and in boredom and in frustration makes us understand, suggests us that the single face, the natural face, was not enough to convey his frustration. So he had to use another semiotic device, which is not belonging to the face, which is the hand, in order to convey his message in a stronger way. So all the semiotic devices that I listed before, cosmetics, makeup, jewelry, tattoos, caps, or masks, in the proper sense, are like an amplifier of the message that we want to convey with our face and with its expressions, with its emotions. And during the pandemic, during the quarantine, the paradox was that even the internet meme employed to convey, to communicate frustration could not be as frustrated as needed, because as we have seen before, the meme was had to change according to the quarantine and the pandemic, and had to take the hands off, had to take the hands off the face. So the meme, if we want to use this piece of media to convey the frustration, and we want to ironically address the situation of the virus and the pandemic, this picture, this photo of Captain Picard from Star Trek is really weakened. It's not as much powerful and strong as before, because this kind of way of communicating frustration is much more rich. Is much more powerful than simply showing the face in its natural condition. So during the pandemic, we were not even allowed to be as much frustrated as we would like, but still, using internet memes themselves and other semiotic device conveying digital faces, we can try to laugh about it. Thank you for listening. I hope I was not too long in the exposition. And now I go back to the chat to see questions or.
Thank you very much. Chinese face is also about the small differences, about understanding from the small signs what is different in two cultures, what is different between two different faith cultures, but also what is different about the emotions that these face cultures convey. So the Chinese face palm emoji is this is the emoji face palm. So it's interesting because both in the West and the East, the reference for the creation of the face palm an idealization of is a representation of the face through a mediatic representation. In both cases, is cinema or TV for the case of the West. So this smiling facepalm was designed by Tencent for the platform WeChat. That is the platform that we use in order to communicate also with our high and students. WhatsApp, because it's not used in the West, but they used it in Tencent, which was created for the first time in 2016. And then what you see is the sequential revisions until the present one, which is the one that you see on the right. So this is a commentary that I've actually taken from a Chinese interpreter of this facepalm. According to this Chinese reader of this sign, this emoji is very rich in connotation. It conveys a discomfiture and awkwardness, but with the touch of a humorous seek joy amidst hardship sentiment. So this is very interesting because you see, the concept of the face is very important in Chinese culture, is very important in Chinese society. Actually, there is a very famous sociologist in Western sociology called Irving Goffman, who elaborated a whole sociological theory about the fact that individuals in society use a lot of energies in order to keep their face, in order to save their face. But actually, this sociologist was inspired by China and by Chinese society and by Chinese scholars, because in China, losing one's face is very bad. It's something that actually should not happen. You should not lose your face, and you should not let other people lose their face. You should always try to make sure that other people do not lose their face either. So this emoji is interesting because it shows that actually this culture of the face is present also in the internet version of face-to-face communication, in the internet a version of this face culture. So we have an emoji that expresses embarrassment, but still the face behind the hand is not completely lost. The face behind it in a rhetoric in linguistics, we call it oxymoron, because on the one hand, there is this expression of embarrassment, which is the face covered by the hand, but still the face is keeping the smile with tears on. It is as if you were saying, okay, I did something wrong, but please smile about it together with me. Don't blame me. We can still, although this is an embarrassing situation, keep our smiling face on. So it expresses this light says some emotions of dissatisfaction, but the smile lightens the social tension. Because of its uniqueness and practicability, this all-purpose emoji has rapidly become one of the best loved and most widely used emojis in China. And actually, on the 21st of November 2017, Zhao Pingjin filed a trademark application for smiling facepalm in China. So it tried actually to have a patent to become the official creator of this face palm for merchandise such as shirts, baby clothing, scarves, and hats in Class 25. But following a preliminary examination, Jane's application went into a notice period on 13th of August 2018, which sparked an outcry of IPR infringement and squatting in the Chinese IP community. So eventually, there wasn't any trademark associated with the face palm. The face palm can be freely used, but it can be freely used also because, as you see, in 2019, it was the most used emoji in China, much more than the simply smiling face, much more than the emoji with the face in front of one's head, much more than the okay emoji, and much more than the rose. The rose is also an emoji that is very, very popular in the West. It's not as you. It is really wonderful what you did, Gabriele, because in a way you showed with your presentation that there are a interesting cultural differences between the way in which emojis are created, are used, are shared, are modified in the West and in China. We all use emojis. We all have a face, but even our emojis change and have different characteristics. So I don't know if you guys have any questions, or if you have any comments, or if you want to say something about the ways in which you guys use this emoji, if our reconstruction, our interpretation was correct, or whether you want to add something about it. Do you use this emoji yourself?
Massimo, someone in the chat says that, yes, I use it when I can't finish my homework.
Oh, yeah. This is of course something that it must be an experience of students everywhere in the world, a cross-cultural experience. There is a comment in Chinese.
陆家华同学，你要发言吗？不发言的话，把麦克风关一下，谢谢。
Okay. Is that a comment or question, Xuan Qiao?
No, just some noise.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. So I see that there is something in the chat. Okay, thank you very much. If there are no comments, yes, I do like emojis and memes, but I've noticed that verbal descriptions has become more and more important in the expression of memes. Yeah, go ahead, Gabriele.
Sorry, Massimo. I just wanted to say that I agree with this comment, because in the West, and so I'm asking to our Chinese audience if it is the same also in China. In the West, there is a growing new trend which is called text posting. So kind of verbal, textual, with text only memes that are just a kind of stream of consciousness without punctuation, without syntax, and it's only a kind of bananas text, a kind of crazy text, nonsensical text, and it's becoming a kind of literary genre over the social media in the West. And this is one phenomenon. Another interesting phenomenon is that we we have two in the West. Obviously, we have two main. Not really in China. Okay, maybe on Instagram. Okay, thank you. Maybe we have two big types of internet memes. One internet meme is just visual, of the visual kind, like like all the emoticons and emojis, if we call them primitive internet memes, while other memes in the West are really full of text, and they are meaningful in the relationship between the visual part and the textual part. So it's meaningful, the comment that it's made on the picture by the text. And we have this really famous template, which is central picture and then two strings of verbal text at the top and at the bottom in this way. And it's the most widespread mainstream internet meme format in the West. So I think that the verbal description is very important. So thank you for the comment.
Thank you very much, Gabriele. And I don't know if we can take advantage from your presence here, since you're an expert on virality, but this is also a course of general semiotics. So we talk about the face, we talk about emojis, but we also talk about the general laws of communication and meaning making and meaning sharing. I wonder whether you could answer a very difficult question in very simple ways. So, could you tell us something about why something becomes viral? What is it that makes something viral? Do you have, after studying viral contents and virality, do you have any idea about why certain things on the internet become viral and other don't?
Okay, it's a very difficult question and subject and issue, but I have some clues. We can, if we think to the very basics of any semiotic system, we have these three components, which are the semantics, which is the meaning. We have the syntax, which is the order of the elements, okay, the disposition of the elements, and then we have the pragmatics, how the semiotic system or the sign is actually employed, used by people, okay. If we think of the semantics, most internet memes and most viral phenomena that I have experienced and studied, so they are mostly coming from Western countries, present a kind of controversial content, something that is considered as important, but at the same time, something that may cause what we call today in mediological studies polarization. So something that some people would like a lot, and from the other hand, is something that other people would not like at all. And we can see this mechanism of how viral content becomes such. So we can see how this phenomenon work by scrolling the social media feeds of politicians everywhere, because public communication in general is focusing on the fact that contents are strong, are effective, are relevant, and they can cause polarization. And this is one aspect. So, for example, in the United States, the video of this black person called Floyd became viral because it was graphic content, it was violent, and it it caused the fact that any viewer would put his or her own values in place in order to understand and in order to appreciate or not the video. So this is one component. The other component is the fact that the more the piece of media, so the text, the picture, or the video, allows freedom and the possibility to be modified by the user, can become viral in general. This is a really semiotic principle. So know that culture works actually in precisely this way. There is this French semiotician called Genette who talks about intertextuality, the fact that culture is made up by texts, so not only visual texts, not only verbal texts, but any kind of semiotic object. So culture works as a cover relationship. Texts quote and remix other texts, and this very mechanism of functioning of most online culture in general. There is a field of study which is called remix culture studies, and most viral and internet memes are successful just right because they allow a certain gradient, a certain extent of freedom to the user. The picture that the format of picture I was talking about a few minutes ago. So with the central picture and the verbal text at the top and the verbal text at the bottom is precisely built in this way. The picture has to be all the same for anybody. On the contrary, the text may change, and actually you have to change it in order to appropriate the meme and its meaning and to create new meaning according to what you want to communicate. So virality is a really complex issue, but the fact that the content has a kind of strength, visual materials that become viral are really strong, are graphic, or are particularly funny. They have this kind of feature. And on the other hand, other types of viral contents rely upon this feature of being indefinitely and maybe infinitely recreatable and remodifiable so as to be appropriated by each and one single user. So the fact that you can add your own piece to the text and to the discourse is a key component.
Thank you very much, Gabriele. That was a real challenge. You had to answer this very complex question in a short amount of time. So, if there are any other questions or comments, I really like to thank you very much for this participation of yours in the seminar, which you presented was. Really brilliant, and I guess the other students from Shanghai University appreciate it too. So thanks a lot again for your contribution, and hopefully we're going to be able soon to listen to your talks and your lectures again in Shanghai, and not only through Zoom. So thanks a lot. We're going to take all together now a break between. And we also started to talk about a particular kind of sign. It is the face, a very complex sign, because it is a sign that belongs to nature, but it is also a sign that is modified by culture. And I showed several examples to you you probably remember the artificial faces, the faces that are created by artificial intelligence. We also realized that artificial faces are now created not only in 2 dimensions, but also in 3 dimensions through holograms or through masks, silicon masks. So today I would like to show you a video which is quite instructive because it shows to what extent wings, then in photographs, then in movies, but little by little, the capacity of for very realistic faces, even these faces did not exist in reality, it has improved. It has improved to the point where now we can have this kind of representations. Let's watch this little video. Okay, so this video is a little video about a company in Japan that produces very realistic masks. And I don't know if you were able to follow the captions in English. Maybe some of you can also understand a little bit of Japanese. But the guy was actually saying that he was working before in a photocopy company. So he was working with machines, making copies of documents, for instance, like companies like Xerox and other similar companies. So while he was working for this company making photocopy machines, he had the idea that probably also the face could be copied, that he could produce a very realistic, very faithful reproduction of an existing face. And if you go to the website of this company, it's very strange because there is a section for frequent questions and people want to reproduce even the face of their dogs, the face of the cats, or they want to have masks made out of pictures of people who have died, who are not there anymore. So it's a very interesting business, but it is, as you read in the captures, particularly useful for the industry that is called Face ID. You know what face recognition is? Face recognition is very advanced in China, it's very popular in China, very popular and is used more and more also in a continents. I remember when I'm in Shanghai, I live in a little apartment on campus, and I remember there were even these automatic machines to sell products that you could activate with facial recognition. Anyway, facial recognition, face recognition is also used for security purposes. There is face recognition when you go to the airport. When I go to the airport in Shanghai, of course, the first thing is to use this technology in order to make myself recognizable and identifiable for custom officers, custom protection officer in China. But now this technology is not used by governments, by intelligence agencies, by states around the world. It is used also by common individuals. You know, probably some of you might have a cell phone, a mobile phone, an Apple mobile phone, a Huawei mobile phone that includes a technology of face recognition. How can we demonstrate to our cell phone that it is actually us and not someone else? It is not our mom, our dad, a friend, a boyfriend, or a thief that is going to use the cell phone. Well, in the past, you had the cell phone and you had to digit a code, usually a sequence of digits, of numbers, in order to enter the cell phone. But then another system was developed. It was developed first by Apple in California, but it was actually also engineered in cooperation with China. So at some stage, Apple produced devices that could be activated by touching a sensor with the finger, and so by showing the correct fingerprints to the phone or to the pad or to the computer. So the computer from which I'm talking to you has a little sensor. Every time that I want to use the computer, I put my index on this sensor. The sensor reads my fingerprint and I can access the computer. It is much faster, of course, than having to type a password in order to enter my computer. It is also more practical because I can lose my password, I can forget my password, but of course, I'm not gonna lose my finger. My fingerprints will be always with me, with my body. So it is extremely practical and extremely handy to enter a device like my computer using my finger instead than using a password. At the same time, technology has advanced even more, and now on many devices, for instance, on Apple phones, the last generations of Apple phones, I don't use my finger. I don't use only a password or a finger to enter the device. I can enter the device by just showing my face to the phone. The phone will recognize my face and will understand that it's me and not someone else's. So I'll be able to enter into the system and use the mobile phone. This is based on the fact that we have unique fingerprints, but we also have unique faces. So our face can be used as a sign of identity, recognition, and identification by human beings, but also by machines. There is a history of fingerprints. When fingerprints were first used in a court trial for justice purposes, for law purposes, do you know where first in the world fingerprints were used to identify a person? Well, it was in the, if I remember well, 3rd century BC in China. China is the first place in the world where fingerprints were used to identify individuals in courts. So there is a very long tradition associated with fingerprints in China, associated with a using bodily parts to recognize who an individual is. And this is also semiotics, because semiotics is about sign, but our fingerprints are a sign that tell something about our identity, about who we are. So we saw a video about this Japanese company that produces masks that are an actual copy, an exact copy of existing faces. Now, there is an English word to designate an exact copy of something. This word is replica. A replica is an exact copy of something. Any perceptible difference, we realize that these masks are not real faces. We realize that these masks are masks. Why do we realize it? Well, because they are three-dimensional, but the face is not something that we usually come across isolated from the rest of the body. You have a face, but you also have a head and a body. So these masks are just a face, and moreover, these masks are also static. They don't move. We realize that they're masks. But the question is, does a machine realize that these are masks? Does the ID face, identification system of an Apple phone, realize that these are masks and not real face? In other words, can we use these masks produced by this Japanese company in order to have access to an Apple phone or to a computer, or even to fool the identification system of an airport, for instance, by using one of these masks? This is why these masks are produced, in order to test the ID systems of mobile phones, of machines that are used at custom controls, and so on and so forth. You see, there is a constant race between people who try to come up with perfect systems to identify and recognize people automatically, and people who, on the contrary, test these devices try to find some difficulties, some lacunae in the ways these machines work. This is why these imperfect masks, these very realistic masks, are used in order to test these devices. Now, probably by looking at these masks, you might have had different feelings. I don't know what your feelings were, but probably for many of you, the feeling was, okay, this is a little bit strange. This is a little bit bizarre. This is a little bit creepy. Yeah, that's exactly the word. Creepy, very good. Creepy is the word. Very good, Xiao Yang. But I'm going to show you something now. I'm going to share the screen again. You see, there is a competition on the internet, a very special competition. The competition about the creepiest looking face of robot. The creeping, this is a world organization that developed and these users. And you know, there are different kinds of robots that are produced in Japan, in China, in other parts of the world. But most of them are actually produced in Asia. And some of these robots are called humanoid robots. So it means that they are robots, they are machines, they are endowed with some complex movements, but at the same time, they are also humanoid, meaning that they do not look simply like robots. They look a little bit like human beings. So their creators, their engineers actually wanted them to look like human beings. So this website has a ranking, which is a ranking made by experts together with those people who go to this website in order to rank robots according to which ones are the creepiest ones. And you see, the creepiest ones is a robot called Telenoid, which is a robot endowed with a human face. At the same time, this human face seems a little bit ghostly, you know, like if it was a ghostly face. Let's watch a little video about it. Okay, as you see, this is the desire for somehow creating some representations of the human face and to attach these representations to non-human entities, to machines. This can go very far. But as our fellow student underlined, there is something uncanny about it. There is something creepy, there is something strange, because we know that all these robots are just objects, that they're just machines, but then we cannot completely forget, disregard the fact that they have a face when we interact with them. So whenever an object is given a face, the interaction with this object becomes a little bit like a human interaction. Think about interacting with a puppet. Think about interacting with a doll. But think about also interacting with a robot that has a very complex way of moving, and at the same time, it has this possibility of having a human face. So philosophers, scholars, semioticians, they are all reflecting about it. And I really like the comments that were in the chat. Someone is commenting, it is very stiff. Yeah, it is indeed very stiff, because you see, our face is a very complex machine from the point of view of the thousands of muscles that move our face. So in order to perfectly reproduce the movement of our lips, the movement of our jaws, the movement of our eyes into a 3D object, we must take into account that what we see is actually the product of a very complex machinery made of bones, tendons, muscles, and a complex interaction between them. It is difficult to reproduce that, but at the same time, I'm going to now show something else to you, because a progress is being made in this domain more and more. So robots are endowed with more and more realistic faces that can move in an increasingly realistic phase. And this is, for instance, let me share the screen once again. This is Erica. Erica is the first artificial intelligence robot who actually gained a role in a Hollywood movie. It has been cast in a lead role in a $70 million science fiction movie. And Erica is a robot endowed with a very complex and very sophisticated face that can actually move in a way that becomes very realistic. Although I must say that I also like the second comment. Is someone who talks about uncanny valley. You probably know what uncanny valley is. Uncanny valley is a term that has been created by a Japanese scholar, Professor Surace, who's going to talk in our seminar. We'll talk a lot about the uncanny valley. But the uncanny valley is an area of face perception, or more in general, of the perception of the human body, in which at some stage our feeling of being able to recognize in a representation another human face, another human being, is accompanied by a feeling of uncanniness, of something that is disquieting, of something that is creepy. So think about animation movies. Think about computer graphics. Computer graphics, it has been used more and more in order to create some very realistic simulacra of the body, some very realistic simulacra of the face. it all started mainly in video games. It is in video games that computer graphics has first start to create more and more realistic simulacra of human faces. But then this progress made in video games was used also in other domains, for instance, in movies. So what happens when we see bodies, human bodies, represented in video games, advanced video games? For instance, also when we are immersed in virtual reality. What happens when we see the faces of characters in video games? Well, they look very realistic to us. They look very believable. But at the same time, we always realized that something is wrong. We always realize that there is something different between these faces and the way faces appear to us in real life through photographs or through movies. So why is that? Why is that we cannot completely believe in human faces represented in video games or in human faces reproduced in computer graphics movies? Well, the reason is that partially still we need a lot of processing and a computer power, computational power, in order to have a very realistic representation of the face moving through a computer graphics movie. But it is also because we somehow recognize simulacra of faces as real faces because we follow certain conventions. We are used to recognize faces in pictures and movies as realistic pictures, but we are not used to do the same with computer graphics. We tend to believe that computer graphics is about fiction, is about recreation. Now this is changing. This is changing because, as I showed to you yesterday, there are actually experiments with artificial intelligence, with neural networks, that give rise to faces that are completely reconstructed. They are digital faces, but at the same time, they have a photographic quality. They seem to be completely realistic in their features. So we must certainly proceed in our research about artificial faces from the point of view of semiotics. But let me show something to you. Okay. Okay. So now I'm going to show you the short presentation I give in English of my research project. It's a short video. Let's watch it together.
We can't hear the sound.
Okay, I'm sorry about it. But what is important is probably that you can watch the video project with a different microphone. What about like this? Hi, my name is Massimo Leone. I'm the PI, the principal investigator of Facets, Face Aesthetics in Contemporary E-Technological Societies, a research project financed by a consolidator grant of the European Research Council, ERC. Okay, so this is a very simple video. It is made with a extremely simple computer graphics, but at the same time, it gives you also an idea of how it is extremely difficult to convey an idea of naturalness, an idea of authenticity, an idea of spontaneity, especially if you have the real face on the one hand talking to you, and on the other hand you have a, let's say, really poor computer graphics simulation of it. You're going to immediately realize that something is wrong. And why are you going to immediately realize that? Well, because the face is a special object for our brains, is a special object for our sight and vision. When we look at the face, our brain does not work in the same way as when we look at a hand, for instance, or when we look at a bottle or a glass or an object whatsoever. So whenever we look at a face, our brain starts working in a slightly different way. And I'm going to show you why this happens, or one of the reasons for which this happens. So let me share the screen again. What is this? Well, if you have to be completely literal in describing what this is, you should say that this is a dry leaf with another dry leaf with two peach bones and a fragment of ceramic and two little purple flowers. But this is not what you thought when you first saw this image. When you first saw this image, you couldn't stop, you couldn't refrain from thinking, this is a face. What about this? You see, this is a piece of news that so let me show you something else. Okay, this is something that was in the news some days ago. There was this US girl. Unfortunately, she had a very cute dog, which is the one in the picture on the right. But the dog died. And soon after, a few minutes after, she looked at the sky and wow, she saw her dog's face in the sky. And she took a picture and she sent this picture to the newspapers, and the newspapers published this news, which became viral. It was then reproduced in many media around the world. So what happens here? What happens is a special phenomenon in the functioning of our brain, which is called pareidolia. Pareidolia. Pareidolia comes from a Greek word, eidos, which means figure, image, and the prefix para, which means not true, which means fake. Pareidolia is the phenomenon that takes place every time we look at the sky, we look at clouds, or we look at the trunk of a tree, and we have the impression that we see a face in it. And actually, if we take a picture of that and we show this picture to a friend of ours, then everybody, this friend, is gonna also think that that is a face. It's pareidolia. Pareidolia is very common. It can happen with clouds. It can happen with vegetables. It can happen with objects as well. You see, these are everyday objects. It's a tap. It's a little soap together with the hot and cold taps, is a safety belt in a car. But we cannot actually refrain from seeing here a smiling face with a long tongue, and two eyes with a mouth and a tongue, and two eyes and a nose and a mouth, and so on and so forth. So this is pareidolia. So there are many, many examples of pareidolia, and there are even some artists who actually use pareidolia in order to create some artistic effects. So this is a kind of artistic process called eye bombing. Let me show it to you. So in eye bombing, what happens is that you have some random shapes in the environment, and it is sufficient to paste on these random shapes in the environment two eyes, two goggling eyes, in order to transform those shapes into face. So now, for the simple fact that there are these two eyes, we see a face with two eyes, but also two ears. And the same goes with this image. We can actually turn a very wasted pillar, cement pillar in the street into a face. Cracks in the wall can become a face. A broken element in the urban environment can become a face. Even a photograph, the first taken photograph of a black hole, can become a face. And a trunk, of course, and a little shape in the ground, and a little stain, and even a stain which shows a profile, which for the simple fact of having two eyes, then it shows some hair and the mouth and nose and chin. So this is the phenomenon which is known as a pareidolia. You see, all these are examples of a pareidolia, where we cannot actually stop seeing a face for the simple fact that two eyes are placed on top of a visual configuration. So why is that? why is it that we recognize faces where there aren't any faces? How is it that we look at the clouds and clouds are just clouds? There is no dog represented there. It's just water. But still, we recognize faces in the clouds. We look at the trunk and we recognize faces in the trunk. How has it? Well, this phenomenon has been studied in face perception by psychologists, by other scholars, and actually it's something that depends on the way in which our brain works. I told you, when our brain sees a face, the brain starts working in a very particular way. Why? Because this is something that comes with natural evolution. Natural evolution. You must imagine our ancestors before of the human species, before of the sapiens. Our ancestors were living in very difficult environments, in very dangerous environments. Our ancestors were also often surrounded by predators. They were always in danger. They had to defend themselves from big animals who wanted to turn them into food, that wanted to attack them and eat them. So it has been very important for our ancestors to be extremely sensitive to every visual configuration, to every image in the environment that looked like a face. It was very important for our ancestors to immediately spot two eyes, even though these two eyes were somehow hidden behind a bush or behind another visual obstacle. It was very important for our ancestors to immediately guess that there was a face out there. Now, this ability allowed our ancestors to recognize predators in the environment even without seeing them completely, even though these predators would hide behind bushes or behind the rocks, would try to mimetize. So we have inherited, we have received this ability from our ancestors because this ability proved adaptive. So it allowed our ancestors to survive better in the environment. Now, if you look around Shanghai University campus, if you go out and walk through the campus, you're not going to come across any aggressive animals. You're not going to come across any tigers. You're not going to come across any lions. But still, we have the same ability that our ancestors had. So this is why sometimes when there is something in the visual environment that looks a little bit like a face, we immediately recognize a face. When there is a visual configuration of spots and stains in the environment that looks like a face, we immediately recognize a face. Why? Because for our ancestors, it was actually a much better to recognize some faces where these faces were not actually there than to not recognize faces when these faces were actually there. So it was better for our ancestors to be wrong instead of being in recognizing more faces than there were actually in the environment, than a not recognizing a face and as a consequence a fall of prey of a predators in the environment. So this is the phenomenon which is called a pareidolia. And pareidolia is actually pretty fan. You know, it can be used for different purposes. Now, let me show you one last pareidolia, which is particularly interesting for us. Okay, so this is a pareidolia, but it is a pareidolia which is used for a particular kind of visual test, which is called captcha test. You know, if you go around the web, in many circumstances, when you enter a website, you must actually first demonstrate that you are a human being. And how do machines, how do websites now try to understand whether you are a human being or a robot? Well, robot, especially algorithms with artificial intelligence, can do very complex things, can imitate human beings. They can work like bots. What algorithms are still in trouble with is something that human beings still do better than machines. What is it that we still do better than machines? Well, what we do better than machines, for the moment being, maybe things will change, is to recognize images. So the captcha test is actually a test that tells us, that asks us to identify certain type of images within a series of images that have been chosen on purpose to test our ability to discriminate between significant and insignificant pictures, between right and false pictures. And so this is a very funny captcha test that uses pareidolia because it shows in this matrix of 16 squares some little dogs with very cute faces, but it shows also muffins that have a visual configuration with their blueberries and the round shape that might be taken for a face. So the first impact that we have when we look at this picture is that, oh my God, what's happening here? Where are the dogs and where are the muffins? But then, of course, when we concentrate, we, the humans, realize where the muffins are and where the dogs are. But for a machine, for an algorithm, it might be very difficult to come up with the right answer, to understand which image is the image of a muffin and which image, on the contrary, is the image of a little dog. So this is a simple example to make you understand that when we humans look at a face or at something that looks like a face, our brain works differently. And thank you for spelling this word. I'm going to write it in the chat. The phenomenon of pareidolia frequently comes up, and I'm really glad that Chinese translation for pareidolia was also a show to you. So I think we are like 3 minutes before the conclusion of our lecture today, and I would like to ask you whether there are some questions or comments, or if everything is clear. Let me give a little summary. Today we have started with the class, with the lecture of Professor Gabriele MARINO. Gabriele MARINO is a specialist in emojis, memes, viral communication. He also studies the digital representations of the face, and he tried to a lecture about how a new visual digital representation of the face palm, became viral, turned into an emoji, and was more and more widespread, uh, first taking inspiration from a cinema and TV, but turning then into a representation used in everyday digital conversations. We also tried to point out that emojis are a global phenomenon, but there are also local varieties. The Chinese face palm is different from a Western face palm. And from this difference, you can understand something more about cultures. The second part of the lecture was more general, and it was about a signs again, signs that are used to reproduce the face, but also that are used to identify the face, to turn the face into a sign. We said that when we use the face as a sign, something particular happens because the face is not an object whatsoever for our brain, is a particular object that uh, has our brain react in a particular way. We see it in the phenomenon of pareidolia that we just talked about. So I know if there are any questions or comments on this last minute before I say goodbye for now. Well, in that case, if there aren't any comments,